in youth development, in content management, and it's a very special organization because it teaches kids, it teaches youth and adults in all types of leadership positions. So not just specific avenues. For example, advocacy and public policy leadership. So if you could go to the next slide. So APPL is focusing on how the people can use their voice and what they know in order to push for social change in not only their communities but in Congress and town hall, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really special program. It was started last year around April, and we've gone to a lot of things. We've done a lot of things. For example, we've met with senators and congressmen. We've done community dialogues, and we also cover a lot of topics. For example, um, mass lynchings in India and mass incarceration in America. So next slide. So we're starting to create this new APPL certification in order to have students who are in ILIA be able and ready to understand society and also act on their understanding. It's a very cool initiative that we're doing. You guys are actually involved in it right now as we speak because you guys are taking the first class. So there's 3 classes. There's a research paper and then a capstone project in order to get fully certified. There's also some bonus electives. If you want to know more from that, please contact me, Brother Saber, or Brother Amen, for more information. So that's a little intro about what ILIA is. So I'll give it back to Saber.
All right, thank you, Alawi. All right, so today we're going to start off with the APL 101 course, and this first class is about public advocacy and the basics of government and the history behind public advocacy. So we'll be covering essentially the role of government, how it works for us. We're going to go over some landmark court cases that define the need for public advocacy, like, you know, certain moments in history and certain court cases that definitely like showed the need for public advocacy and why, you know, our opinion and our voices are needed for change in the country. And after that, we'll discuss topics on individualism and the role we play in public advocacy, as well as how we can get involved. So how you and me, and how the youth of America and how, you know, marginalized communities and minorities can get involved, and how they can voice their opinion and get representation and be able to have the same opportunities and rights as the majority of America. And hopefully we can get an understanding of how we can go about doing that, and as well as, you know, learn some interesting facts about just the history behind it and how we got to where we are. And before we start, let's do a quick introduction, like just to get to know the students. Does anyone want to start off? Just your name and your grade and one interesting fact. Let's do one interesting fact. Who wants to go first? Did you guys hear that? Or
I guess I'll go first. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Amin Ahmed. I'm currently an intern at Aliyah. I'm in 11th grade. I do like a lot of sports, I guess. I really look forward to this class.
interesting. All right, nice to meet you, Amen. All right, who wants to go next?
Amin, the one who was texting you.
Oh, Amin. Okay, nice to meet you, Amin. Okay. Who'd like to go next?
So also you can put your feedback in the chat box if you're unable to speak or if there's background noise. So again, the question is, what is your background, your grade, and your interest? So if you could put that in the chat box.
We can go over
and
that.
send it to the host or the co-host, or you can unmute yourself and also share with the group.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Muhammad Badawi. I'm a senior, and I guess an interesting fact is I like politics.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna try to find a way to see if we can pull out individuals. Is there anybody else who'd like to go next?
No, I
Or-
can go. My name is Jenna. I'm a sophomore and I'm interested in government and law.
All right. think we have 10 people in the class, so we'll just keep going down. And if you guys can't speak, again, you can just drop it on the Q&A or the notes and or the presentation. Okay, I think the rest of us would just like to talk in the notes, I guess, and we'll figure something out as we go on. But for now, let's get started with the course. So basics. Let's of government, and the basics of government and what it embolds and what it stands for. So, what essentially is government? Does anybody want to tell me what government means to them, and how they view it, and just aspects of government? Let's just talk broadly about government. If anybody would like to share, and just basic idea, and we can inshallah start a discussion about it and try to just go around the room and see what if we can build off of each other's ideas, inshallah.
So the government is the elected body that the people choose to govern them.
An elected
I guess
body.
that's a broad definition.
But would you say that certain governments restrict governing or like public opinion? Would you say that? Or do you think that government as a whole just represents the voice of the people?
Well, it depends. Yes, some governments are not elected by the people, nor do they represent its wishes. But the general definition of a government is something elected by the people to represent the people's wishes and to govern them depending on those wishes.
Okay. Does anybody else would like to say anything about that? I feel like without government, without like structure in society, we get to a point where, you know, we like our needs obviously as people, like we have individuals and we have individual needs and we have personal whims and woes that we'd like to see addressed. And like if you look at it from the bare minimum, if you start at like the root of a family or like a nuclear family or like a small tribe, for example, if you look at small sections or groups of humanity, we notice that ultimately it's in human nature for us to bond together and to create what is essentially a community. We like to create community, and we like to find ways for us to just kind of work together. And so I personally feel like with government, it allows us to have a structure that creates, unity, that creates us to find ways to work together for a common goal. So like, do you guys feel like government allows us to essentially bond together and to find ways where we could work together or we can accomplish the common goal or find ways where we can progress as a community or a society? Okay. I mean, if no one wants to talk, I'm gonna have to start calling on people, guys. I mean, do you have anything to say about this?
So I didn't catch 100% of what you said, but I did hear about what you were saying about bonding on and like ideas and everything. But really quickly, when I think of the word government, I think of just like a structure that's designed to keep peace and order, as well as maintain the affairs of like a large body. So like there's a body of maybe like you have a party of people, and then the government's just like could be even one person who's the leader of
Right.
the whole group, and they're designed to keep the whole group together and everything. Like take care of all the main affairs and everything.
So,
That's what
like,
I think of.
in the bare minimum, so what I'm understanding from what you said is that do you feel like it represents like a nuclear group, essentially? So, for
Yeah,
example, family,
that's essentially what I'm
head of
saying. Yeah.
household. So likewise, in government, there's a head, and decisions are made either communally or one is in charge. Is that what you're kind of trying to say?
Yeah, basically that's yeah. There's like government, basically a leadership of a body.
Does anybody else have anything to comment on that? Shahid, Brittany, Jannah, anybody? Mohammed?
I think for me, it's kind of the same thing. I also kind of agree that like government would kind of entail like elected officials, or in certain cases they're not elected, but kind of like a leader or like a group or a certain person that's kind of in charge of like governing another group.
Right. And how do you think that affects us as a whole? Like, how do you think decisions made from one individual affect like allows us to affect a group as a whole? Like, how do you think that a decision made from like another group affects you? And like, how do we like go about doing that? And how do we like learn from that? If anybody can talk on this, I'm trying to make it as casual as possible. We can have like a straightforward conversation on the matter, like just broadly about government, about whatever ideas you guys have about government, or just how you think it could affect us as a community, or what it means to you.
As long as the government keeps on hearing the people's opinions and the citizens, then they're listening to us and they know what they're doing. But if they're closed off, then I think that's when it becomes a problem.
If this community is closed off from the government, or if the government, refuses to acknowledge the rights and needs.
Yeah, the latter.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I feel as if the government refuses to respect and view our needs and wants, I feel as if it doesn't essentially work the same way. Like the question was, how does government affect us? And you essentially answered the third question. How can we affect government? So if you feel like the government doesn't necessarily allows us to voice our opinions, and they try to neglect our needs, how do you feel like we can possibly find ways to affect government, has to find ways for us to advocate for ourselves if the government isn't allowing for that? Also, who just talked? If I could just get your name.
My name is Shahid.
Shahid. Okay. Yeah. So what do you think about that?
I think that I don't know. Is like if the government. Wait, can you say the question again?
So from what I've understood, from what you summarized, it sounds like you feel like there are areas where the government neglects the needs of its people, and they neglect, they don't essentially recognize what is needed by their people, by their constituents, right?
Yeah.
And so in cases like that, how do you feel like we can voice our opinion? How do you feel like we could affect the government and try to, say, hey, we aren't being represented by you, the governing body? Because essentially that's their job, right? As a governing body, their goal is to be able to represent the people that they're in charge of, the people that they govern. And in a state where they're neglecting, the needs of, for example, a minority, or even like the entire country as a whole, how do you feel like there are ways for us to affect the government, how we could voice our opinion, or how we can advocate for that?
I think as long as we come together and make our voices heard, then they have to do something about it.
Can you give like an example? Do you know any examples of that?
I guess like social reforms from the progressive era or something like that. Like
Social,
women's.
yeah. If we look at social reforms, or if you look at the civil rights movement, again, it started off grassroots. If you guys know what I mean by like grassroots movement, if you notice that when marginalized people in a society come together and they realize that their voices aren't heard, it creates a collective. And without a collective, what we have is essentially like no unity. So with a collective group of people, it's easier to influence a larger body, because at the end of the day, it is the government versus the people. I don't want to say versus, I want to say the government serves the people, right? And if a government, is neglectful of that duty, and we collectively say, we need change, even as a minority, if we say our needs aren't being reflected as much as the majorities are, right? If we collectively voice our opinion and try to find ways where we can promote and provide for other people, or provide for our, like-minded individuals who believe the same way, we have a collective and we can find a way to address that situation. So you had a good example, the progressive era or the civil rights era, where African Americans were marginalized, and they, being the largest minority, figured it was needed for them to facilitate and call for their own advocacy, because obviously the government wasn't doing that for them, right? And like cases like that, that's a good example. Is there anything else like anybody else would like to comment on? Any other cases that you guys think?
I think the easiest way is just the ballot box. If you think a representative isn't representing you, you can kick him out of office.
That's another way we could. And there's also multiple methods for that to happen, right? I feel as if like if you want to vote somebody out of office, you'd have to, if it was like a structured based government, like in the United States, if you wanted to elect somebody out of office, we'd have to wait for their term to finish, right? We have to wait, and then we'd have to have an election process. And obviously, it won't go the same way as you want it to go, but we'll go over that. That's the basics of democracy. You know, like everybody has a say, and you realize that even though some people aren't represented the same way, everybody has an equal voice, and whatever the majority is allowed, it decides, right? But in this case, I'd want to kind of talk about, you know, the minority and how we like how the people that aren't represented the same way, how do they get to voice their opinion? Who just talked again?
No, that was Muhammad.
Mohammed. Yeah, that was for you, Mohammed. Like, how do you think the minority could go about doing that? Like, for
Well,
example, let's just say the minority can't, you know, they can't vote somebody out the same way because they don't have, you know, equal representation. An
okay,
example
so
being, sorry, the example being African Americans who couldn't vote back in the day, you know?
okay. So then you could go toward, well, there's two methods. You could go for civil disobedience, so like marches, protests, rallies, awareness campaigns, stuff like that. Like so basically the civil rights,
Right.
more from Martin Luther King Jr.'s perspective. Or there's also when the difference in you're being treated becomes so much that it's unbearable. Then you could get something like the American Revolution, where you have to take matters into your own hands.
Yeah, civil disobedience, civil wars, these are all causes of, you know, people being that they aren't represented the same way. You know, civil war being, you know, the southern states who feel as if, you know, because the United States was trying to outlaw slavery, they felt as if, you know, they were a minority, whereas African Americans felt as if they were a minority who were being essentially enslaved, right? And so there are multiple like aspects of this. There's multiple minorities, and at the end of the day, the whole argument goes down to what is a collective that we can all stand by, or like what is something that we could, you know, essentially work to go towards and find a common ground, you know? And I liked your answer. And another good example for that would be when you said take matters into their own hands, the American Civil War. The Southerners did take matters into their own hands when they felt as if they were the minority. And we saw the outcome of that, but these are all good examples. Does anybody else want to add to something before we move on? I haven't heard from Najla and Brittany. If you guys have the same thing to say? I wonder if they're using the box. Check. Oh, shoot. Never mind. I guess you guys aren't using that. Okay. We'll come back to them, I guess, later. But I guess we covered the basics of government. And what I wanted to say as a closing remark for this slide is that at the end of the day, like the bare minimum of government is obviously to represent, all right? And so what we kind of established here is that without representation, we have, you know, we have societies, we have minorities that are willing to fight for their rights, that are willing to, you know, say our voices aren't being heard. We have, you know, and you can go to extremes. You can either go to civil disobedience, you can go to a civil war. There are multiple methods. You can vote somebody out of office. What we know right now is that minorities do have a say, regardless of what form of a government we have, right? Even if it's a dictatorship, minorities, for example, we can talk about Syria. Syria being a dictatorship, we saw how the people of Syria who felt as if the Bashar al-Assad wasn't, you know, speaking on their behalf the same way. They decided that, you know, the only way to possibly call for a change would be what started off as a civil unrest turned into a civil war. And these are examples how we can see minorities voicing their opinion regardless of what the government is or regardless of what the government calls for. All right, and that's the one takeaway from this slide I feel like we need to have, that minorities do have rights in the government and that we can affect them the same way they can affect us. So moving on, we're going to talk about the different types of government that a famous Greek philosopher, Polybius, found out. He was a Greek historian, and he claimed that these four types of governments are the most common in a globalized world or in the world as a whole. So we have the aristocracy, an oligarchy, a monarchy, and a democracy. Does anybody know, does anybody want to like summarize any of these that for the rest of us? Could you guys like to talk about it? I mean, do you have anything to say?
Not really. This is more of like a kind of an introduction to me. I've never heard of any of them except for monarchy and democracy.
Do you want to talk about what do you have to say about monarchies?
Um, I don't know too much about monarchies. I've never really like studied politics in this depth. Um, I mean, democracy. I'm pretty sure we all know what that is. Basically, just the people voting.
The people voting for their elected officials,
Yeah.
the people voting for their leadership.
Yeah.
And when we look at monarchies, I think, okay, well, let me just summarize what these are first, since like we'll go over them since it's the basic for everybody. So in aristocracy is basically comes from the word aristocrat. So the wealthy rule. So in an aristocratic government, we have a family that essentially is the upper class. They have the money and they control a group of people who are obviously marginalized and much poorer than they are. So an example in an aristocratic state would be mercantile states in the medieval Europe, for example, Venice. Venetian culture was very much economic based. So a lot of families that were controlling of the city state were those who had the most money, who were the upper class at the time. And related to that is an oligarchy. Now, an oligarchy is essentially the same thing, except it's a group of wealthy individuals. It's corporations that control. So in an oligarchy, we have corporations that control entire regions that use the region for their own monopolies, for their own corporations. An example of this would be in the 1990s, right? In the 1990s, Vladimir Putin, he essentially gave land reforms to oligarchs who said, hey, you guys get these regions, and if you guys, try to make a profit for the state, you guys can control and you guys can govern these regions. Siberia, a region in Russia, was heavily, they had large oil reservoirs. So a lot of oil companies, a lot of oil firms from Russia, they essentially moved out there. And the people living in those regions, they worked for those corporations. They had no choice. It was a monopoly, right? And in these forms of governments, you notice that it has probably the least amount of human rights, the least amount of like public voice, the least amount of advocacy than the rest, because they don't have a choice in where they work. They don't have a choice in how they work. And the company, in a sense, essentially owns them. The company that they work for or that owns the region essentially owns them. Monarchy is pretty straightforward. It's a lineage-based ruling class. Now, they essentially don't have to come from wealth, because if you haven't noticed, aristocrats could also be, wealthy families to a lineage-based family. But the thing with monarchies is that these countries, if we look at history, monarchies come out of what? Conquest and regime changes. So, for example, empires in Mughal India, for example, in the Muslim Mughal India, they constantly changed monarchs simply off of conquest. And this still goes to the point where this one family or this one ruling class has complete autonomy over the area that they conquered. And again, this is another example of government that probably offers the least amount of human rights, especially even a modern sense. Do you guys know any modern monarchies?
Saudi
Any
Arabia.
Saudi Arabia? Yeah. Do you want to talk about what do you have to say about Saudi Arabia?
It's a crown prince who's trying to be king, and he's destroying his country.
Yeah, absolute monarchy. He has complete say in what goes in and what goes out of the country. And if you guys know, a lot of Saudi citizens don't get to voice their opinion the same way, you guys could in the United States. A democratic state, you guys have the right to your own opinion. You guys have a right to speech. And in monarchies, like for Saudi Arabia, for example, you notice that no matter what, you cannot speak against the state. Who just spoke? Muhammad, right? Is
Yes.
that Muhammad that spoke, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, Muhammad, it was a good point you brought up, because like we realized that with monarchies, as long as you cannot criticize the government whatsoever, and same with an oligarchy, you can't criticize them because they feed you, they give you the money, they employ you. And what I've noticed is with the majority of these, according to Polybius, we live in a world, we live in societies where these are the four types of governments that are most common, regardless of where you live. Okay. And another one being theocracies, but that wasn't as common in his time. But when he discusses these, he noticed that he touches on human rights, he touches on topics that that resonate with individualism. You know, how do these government types, how do these four types of government affect an individual? Aristocracy, minimal individual rights, especially if you're poor. If you have money, if you have wealth, you have power, you have say, and you have rights. An oligarchy, again, if you have money and if you have power, you own land, you control that land. And anybody who doesn't have money, like, and again, in these two is government types, those who without money, though the poor communities, those are the marginalized people in society. Those are the ones who are the minority and the ones who can't express their voice, like we talked about in the previous slide. In these two governments, and monarchy as well. In a monarchy, you can't essentially speak ill, or you can't revolt or talk against the ruling class. They have complete autonomy over the rules of the and rule and governance of the country, and anybody who disagrees is essentially an enemy of the state and an enemy of the monarchy. Does anybody want to talk about democracies? I feel as if that's one we know the most. Najla, do you want to talk about democracies?
Democracies are when the people choose how they want to be governed and who governs them. And yeah.
Okay, and how do democracies, for example, you guys probably don't know this, but in 2015, former President Jimmy Carter was interviewed, and he said the U.S. is in a way turning into an oligarchy from what was initially a republic, right? A democratic republic where the people have their voice. Now, when he said the U.S. is slowly moving towards an oligarchy, what do you guys think he meant when he said? And going back to what we know about oligarchies, what do you think he meant when he said the U.S. is moving towards an oligarchy?
Can I answer this one?
Yeah, go ahead. Anybody can talk, guys. You guys are like, I'm not calling on anybody. I think it'd be easier if we all just had like a casual conversation about this.
All right, so I want to say like we can kind of see it with Trump right now. I believe you said earlier that oligarchy is like the wealthy group. So we have like a lot of the the electorates and like everybody who's running for office. A lot of them are rich. They have a lot of money, and especially as we've seen with Trump, like they're working for the higher class people and the people with the money. So I think that's kind of probably what he meant when he was saying that.
So do you feel like it's a conflict of interest? Because an oligarchy being corporations have control. And if when Jimmy Carter said we live in a country where it's slowly becoming more oligarchy based as compared to a democratic state, do you feel as if the conflict of interest is between? What do you think the conflict of interest is between?
So I definitely see that like a lot of the times um, the presidential candidates and whatnot, they're always trying to do things for the people, but they're definitely focusing a lot on what they can do for big corporations and such, because uh, um, in the long run, it seems like those are what they think count most, because they'll have more support when they have like bigger corporations and this kind of thing. So
Why do you think they have more support if they have bigger corporations with them?
because there's more people. The bigger the corporation, the more people work under that corporation. The more workers they have, the more they also have the supporters of the people that support that corporation by buying their products or like whatever it is that they do. So they're probably they see that as an opportunity to grab a big group of voters, and so they work for them basically.
Right. And another thing to talk about in that sense would be in the United States, we have this thing called lobbying. Does anybody know what lobbying is?
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about it? Mohammed, is that you, Mohammed?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, bro. You can
So
talk about it.
basically, lobbying is when a group basically a group of people, they want to influence the government, so they start paying people. Basically, it's bribery but legal. They pay them to support their policies.
And that's kind of what an oligarchy is, right? You know, these corporations that have the most money, they have a say in governance, right? They have a say in how things are being run, and they say, you know what, we need certain laws and we need aspects that benefit us as a company, right? And when Jimmy Carter said, this is a conflict of interest between the people and the corporations, I think give me your personal input on these guys, but I feel as if this was mainly a commentary on how profit-driven countries that focus more on profit and focus more on a grander economy, tend to marginalize the needs of their own people because what? They value material needs, they value money over, basic human rights, basic human needs. We had cities in the United States that didn't have water for years. Flint, Michigan hadn't had water, a basic human right, for years. And multiple companies were still getting subsidized by the government because, they had money to back up their claims. If an oil company, if an oil firm says, we need money for fracking, and we will, essentially give money to the government. We can, provide for the government. We can provide economically if you incentivize oil fracking over clean air or clean resources. And Flint, Michigan, this was the need of basic human right for the people. The people said, we as a voice, we're voicing our opinion on why we don't have clean water and why we need it. And it's the basic human right, and we're guaranteed that as citizens of the country. And they still haven't gotten it. And so I feel as if, we got to a point where the state definitely values the need of corporations and the need of wherever the money comes from, rather than what the people need. Because at the end of the day, like Jimmy Carter said, it is a profit-driven system, and without money, you basically don't have influence as much as someone with money could. Does anybody else want to add to that? Just talk about whatever you think, influences governments and influences, I know topics on lobbying and whatnot.
I wanted to add that for if you want to be a president or any person in the government, you kind of have to campaign, and for campaigning it takes a lot of money, and people without money, they can't really campaign as much as the billionaires who can spend millions of dollars on campaigning, which will ultimately help them in their campaign.
Right. No, that's a good point. It ultimately goes to, what money can buy. Also, who just talked?
Najla.
Okay. Yeah, good point. I think someone new just joined the class. Yusra, you just joined?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, cool. So we were talking about the different forms of governments and aspects of it, and we were currently talking on lobbying and how money can buy influence in certain states and in certain political systems. And what Angela said was essentially those who can buy votes, those who feel that money, for example, in a campaign, if Donald Trump was running for president and he had all the money coming in from corporations that essentially pushed him to make decisions on their behalf. They give him money to make decisions on their behalf. If we were moving towards climate control and climate change, and we were trying to push for regulations on environmentalism, and an oil company said, this is bad for our business, Donald Trump, we will give you money for your campaign. We will give you money. Actually, a point on that, I don't think that you could essentially give money if companies can give money to bribe a campaign. I don't know if that's essentially true, but what they can do is they can give money in other ways. They can incentivize, they can say, we can give back to the economy. There's loopholes for it, but in the bare bone structure, you can't really give money like that. But like what Najla said, you could buy politics essentially. You can pay for politicians. You can get them to support your cause and speak on your cause if you have money. And towards the end of the lesson today, we'll talk about the lawmaking decisions and how that affects it. But does anybody else want anything to say about it? Yusra, you just joined. Do you have anything to say about government? What is government?
I was gonna say it's also kind of split by the two parties, Republicans and Democrats, because I feel like Democrats are a little bit more for the people, and especially right now you can see who's more for the people, but it's also because a lot of the government has stocks in these companies, so if their companies tank, that means they're going to lose money. So I feel like that's another reason that they back up the corporation, because they're not trying to lose any money that they put into them.
Right. Who do you think is for? You want to give us an example? Like, who do you think is for the people, and how they, try to vocalize, the opinion of the people versus the opinion of corporations or big money or the wealthy, for example.
Well, right now, I feel like Republicans are not for the people because I know the bill that they just passed, they were trying to throw a lot more money than they currently did into like corporations and stuff. And like the Democrats are more for the people, especially like Bernie and like the people that you see in the news. They're more for you. Um, and I think that's just because like I guess it also depends on like your upbringing too, I guess. Like a lot of the Republicans grew up with money. They had money, like so money to them I feel like it's like indisposable. Like I remember I was watching an interview and I forgot who said it, but she was basically saying that a lot of the Republicans don't even know like how much a gallon of milk is, while most of the Democrats do because they grew up in a less richer home, I guess, or like they have to work harder to get where they are.
Yeah, I think to comment on that, actually, I agree. I feel as if like if you look at heavily Republican leaning states, they focus more on what? They focus more on profit-driven individualism. Okay, they say, you know what, we can get you more rights in lieu of profit. Whereas if you look at Democratic or liberal Democrat states, I think, and this is actually an opinion of mine, but I feel as if they focus more on human rights in the sense of like liberalism, like the basic rights to education, basic rights to speech and whatnot. And if you look at Republican states, those are things that they don't really focus on as much as Democrat states. And there is definitely, in my opinion, a difference in what they believe is more important, like in the sense of education. Like they value different aspects more in Democrat states. I feel as if they focus more on environmentalism. They focus more on rights of minorities, whereas in Republican states it's more or less it's worked for us in the past. Let's keep that going because it's worked for us in the past, right? It's kind of like what you said, old money. That's what the term is. Um,
Mm-hmm.
George Bush, his family came from a very wealthy oil owning industry or family. And his family essentially, for his constituents, he said, we can give you oil jobs. We can give you, we can make you wealthy as long as, that we keep this industry in my constituency, in my state, right? And with examples like that, like it really goes to show, and you made a good point, like where does the money lie, where does profits lie, and what does it take for a politician to get elected, especially if you can try to sway your constituents. And for those of you who don't know what constituents mean, it basically means citizens, the people of a governing body. Okay, and if you can sway the voice and the beliefs of your constituents, then you have essentially a free ticket to get elected because you're controlling what is being said and how they perceive what you say. And so, do you guys feel like we need to focus more on individual driven rights versus rights that are being told, right? For what I mean by that is that like the government say focus on this, I think you should focus on this. Do you guys feel like it's more important to like focus on what you think you need as an individual or what they say that we need as as a society? That's the question.
I feel like as a democracy, you're supposed to focus on like what the people want, not what the government tells you what you want.
Right. Um, and that, yeah, that's individualism. That goes back to the basic concept of democracy. Like I said, according to Polybius here, according to him, democracy is what the opinion is on a forum, what people as their own, as what they voice as their own, right? And like you said, when the government says this is what we need as a collective, that's when we feel like we're not really being, our rights aren't really being, and our rights and needs aren't being viewed the same way because we are being clumped in with what? The majority, right? So when they say we don't need gun reform because, you know, the such and such state doesn't have this problem and another state doesn't have this problem, and that the issue isn't on guns, the issue is on, societies, that's when we have a problem because you are grouping a minority with the majority, right? Let's get an example. A good example would be, marginalized societies, African Americans. They say a majority of African Americans in the United States, they lived in impoverished communities in inner cities, And for the longest time, the government said, this isn't an issue of the state. This isn't an issue of the cities. It's an issue of, the communities. It's because of crime. And, if you look at it from where all these things fall back to, you notice that at the root of the issue, it's because these communities and these marginalized societies aren't being given a voice. If we give them a voice, I feel as if we can get to a point where they can speak for themselves rather than the government speaking on their behalf. Anybody would like to say anything on that? We have to move from the slides in too. Mohammed, do you want to say anything? Or Brittany, Nejda? Honestly, anybody, guys.
Well, so what I think you're saying is that the minorities don't have a voice in choosing how they want to be governed. But in the beginning of the presentation, you said that minorities do have a voice. So I just wanted some clarification on that.
Minorities do have a voice in the sense that certain governments give minorities a voice. Wait, could you repeat your question again? Sorry.
So like, do minorities have a voice or do they don't, like in your opinion?
I think minorities have a voice, but it's a marginalized voice in the sense that some aspects of of a governance. So basically, when in the case of majority versus minority, in a democratic state, majority rules. What the people want goes. However, when in certain cases, when those laws get passed, there are obviously a group of people who are infringed. They don't get to pass they don't have the same views and they don't get the same rights. So if we all pass legislation as a country, if we pass legislation on, for example, let's say they outlawed gay marriage, okay? And they said, you know what, as a collective, as a majority of the country, they believe that this is wrong for the state. And then obviously we have, people who, gay people who think, this isn't fair to us, like this is something that we think is important to us and our voices aren't being heard. So if minorities don't have a right when the majority outcome infringes on their rights, does that make sense? When the outcome is something that leaves people disenfranchised is when it doesn't work in the favor of minorities. And that's why I was saying in the beginning that we need specific rights for minorities. We need advocacy and voice for the minorities so they can express what they need as for their communities, because right now it's being clumped under what the majority thinks. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna have to move from this slide. We went over examples. We went over the 4 types of government according to Polybius. And if you guys have any more questions on, you can ask whenever. So after we mentioned the need for governments and the need for us to voice our opinions as as individuals in the state. Okay, so the whole topic of this is individualism. What do you guys as individuals believe is needed? Okay, so anybody, what does change mean to you? Like what do you see in change?
Well, usually I feel like if we look back in history, like human beings are kind of afraid of change, if I can put it that way. They don't like change. So like if something's been happening for a long time, like generation like slavery, people did not want that change. That was a change, and that scared them because they'd been doing it for such a long time. And when I say like humans are afraid of change, I don't mean like in the small run. I mean in the long run. I mean we can even look at like we can look at history and religions even. Like whenever a new religion came about, there were obviously people that didn't support the religion. That was because they were afraid of the whole having to change. So
Right.
when I think of change, I kind of think of like it could be for the better, but it's not something that's always wanted or.
What I feel like you're saying is, are you saying that people are afraid of change when they are in a state of comfort, when they're comfortable?
Yeah, there you go. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, no, I agree. People are afraid of change when themselves are in a state of comfort. But there are also those who say we need change because, we're not being treated the same way as those who live in comfort. Like slavery, for example, people were so used to slavery for owning slaves because it did well for the economy. They did well for their businesses and their profits that they made. But at what cost? At the cost of the minority, right? At disenfranchising another group of people. And that's what I answered. I think it was Yuster who asked the question. But or I don't know who asked the question, but the girl before me, um, what she meant was, like, do we are minority rights an important thing, or do they have a right or do they not? And like I said in this example, if it relies on the disenfranchisement of another group of people, then obviously, they need change, whereas the other group saying, no, we don't need change. But the other group is speaking as a collective, right? Like I said in the last slide, they speak as a collective. They say, you know what, we don't need this because we are fine the way we are. And like I said, like the government can say that on your behalf. And it's, it voids the concept of individualism. What do we have as individuals? Now, does anybody else want to say anything about change? Like, what does change mean to you, like personally? What are some topics you think that affect you as a high schooler in America?
Online school, when the coronavirus, all the school shut down.
Yeah, coronavirus. It affects you because like there are some people who didn't want to close down schools. They didn't want the states to get shut down, right? And obviously that puts you at risk. And what do they value again? The greater good. They valued the need, or not the greater good. They valued the majority and what they thought was needed for everybody. They collectivized. They collectively spoke for everybody. And I feel as if when it becomes what for students especially, because you guys have such an important say in how things are changed in the future and how things resonate to the older generations in a way. Because right now, honestly, guys, like even though you guys are high schoolers, the people making your decisions aren't high schoolers. They're not people your age. They're not people who grew up in your generation, right? They're much older people, and they think that they have an understanding of what you guys need, and in doing so, they make decisions on your behalf. So why do you feel as if it's important for you guys to voice your opinion, in a situation where others are speaking on your behalf?
Because, or at least for me, I think it's just because like at the end of the day, like we are voting for these people, so you want to vote for somebody who will listen, who in a way will listen to you and who kind of has the same ideas as you. Whilst if you vote for somebody who really doesn't know what you want and stuff like that, you're probably not going to like them, and they're probably going to kind of pick things that you probably don't believe.
Can you give me an example?
Like we always like we're in elections every year. At the end of the day, like we, especially with like our Virginia elections, we vote for our representatives. So like I feel like when you go out and vote, you are kind of in a sense kind of selecting the person that you think will kind of believe in what you believe in. And I feel like that's why it's so important for people to vote, because like if you don't vote and later on like they do something that you don't like, at the end of the day, like you had a chance to kind of speak up and kind of go pick somebody that you think would be a good fit for you and like for everybody else, obviously.
Right.
So like something along those lines.
No, I agree. It definitely, because like what you're saying and what I understood from what you said is that without that understanding that you don't necessarily represent people that don't see the same way as like under it says what is voice, what is influence, and how do we give an understanding. So you kind of touched the topic on understanding. We need to get people to understand what we need instead of what they think we need. Okay, and in connecting that, we have to become vocal. So when we let people know that you need to, for example, if I'm speaking from person A to person B, I think you need to understand that my rights aren't being met in the same way you think they're being met, because you're valuing certain aspects over my individual rights, and in doing so, I'm becoming disenfranchised, right? And so when we become vocal and we express our thoughts and ideas and we concern our needs, and when we collectively say, this is not working for us, it's our right as individuals to be able to have every, as the same rights as a majority. So it's something that we have to, convey and we have to get across. And what are some ways for us to, how do we become vocal? Anybody can talk. Not literally how do we become vocal? Like how do we become vocal in like a state of government or a state of, or a community, like what are some ways for us to get our point across to societies that, don't address our needs, who don't address our thoughts and ideas?
Well, I mean, we always have the lobbying, we have protests, we have now with the internet, we have many ways to get ourselves across, like with social media and etc. There are a lot of ways to do so.
Okay. Yeah, so there's different ways, social media being one. That's if you haven't noticed, social media was a big, game changer in how things are, how things go down these days. Like there were if you remember, like I think last year or so or the year before, there were protests in Sudan against the governing body, against the president, I think Mohammed Bashir, the president of Sudan, who was a dictator, and the people said we don't want him in power, and no one knew about. And the Sudani government shut down the entire country in the attempt to make sure that this protest doesn't go public and it doesn't go viral, so they can suppress it in whatever means possible, right? And what happened was that it only spread via social media. Had it not been for social media, none of us would have known because they attempted to shut down, public dissident, and they managed to shut down how it went down and how the government tried to address the situation, so no one could know what was being held, and they were infringing on the people's rights because they try to shut them down, they try to silence them, and they didn't let them voice their opinion. And because of social media and because of these modern and more and progressive ways of becoming social, it allows us to become vocal and allows us to express our thoughts and ideas in different ways that weren't possible back in the day. Social media is a game changer. Being able to rally for your causes, or being able to publicly speak in a forum, these are all game changers when it comes to vocalizing your ideas and expressing your needs and conveying them to the general public and to the majority. So after that, we're going to talk about some specific examples. Okay, so we're talking about Plessy versus Ferguson. Does anybody know about Plessy versus Ferguson? It's a landmark court case in the United States. I'm assuming not.
Was Plessy I might be confusing this with something else, but was this when there was like slaves, or and there was this guy? No, I don't think I'm talking the right one.
Okay, well, we'll watch
Wasn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
Wasn't
Go
it
ahead.
the court case where they abolished like basically the whole like this sink is for the whites, this sink's for the blacks, like basically got rid of all of that stuff?
Close enough, okay? But yeah, you're on the right track here. We'll watch the video and I'll give you a brief understanding of Plessy vs. Ferguson. It's a minute long. We're just gonna quickly skim through this and tell me what you guys think, okay? Dang, what just happened? Go back. Is the video not working? There we go. Y'all can see this, right?
Yep.
What happened in the Plessy case was that in June of 1892, Homer Plessy boarded a car of an East Louisiana railroad that was designated for use by white patrons only. Although Plessy was born a free person and was 1/8 black and 7/8 white, under a Louisiana law enacted in 1890, he was classified as black and thus required to sit in the colored car. When in an act of planned disobedience, Plessy refused to leave the white car and moved to the colored car, he was arrested and jailed. The Supreme Court upheld the right of Louisiana to have done so. In the Supreme Court's decision of Plessy v. Ferguson, the court upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation, even in public accommodations, particularly railroads, under the doctrine of separate but equal, which was not to be overturned until 1954 when the Supreme Court decided Brown versus Board of Education.
So yeah, you were on the right track there. But Plessy versus Ferguson wasn't passed. It played a big role in the Jim Crow era of the whole concept of separate but equal, is in the sense that, what do you guys think separate but equal meant?
Kind of like keeping. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, it's fine.
Basically like keeping the races separate, but saying that they're still equal at the same time.
Right, and this goes back to 2 slides ago when we mentioned the majority speaking for the minority and saying, you guys are separate, but you guys are equal. And that clearly wasn't the case. African Americans and black people weren't treated equally as white people, and well into Brown versus Board of Education. And so the courts overruled the decision. They said, no, even though you're still, of mixed race, you do not pass as white, because the state of Louisiana and in their state legislature, this essentially considered that he wasn't passing as white, and that he was still a man of color. And it still played a big role in the sense that, like, up in that court case was in 1896, right? And Brown versus Board of Education is what overturned that court case, and that was in the 50s, okay? And that claimed that Brown versus Board of Education did what Plessy versus Ferguson couldn't do, because it ended segregation. It desegregated schools. Now, it facilitated for the rights of Black Americans, and they said that, we have the right, we need a platform to speak, and we need a platform for us to be able to voice our opinions. And they did that through the NAACP and Thurgood Marshall, former United States Supreme Court Justice, okay? And so what's important about this is that, they realized that we got to a point where almost 50, 60, 70 years after Plessy versus Ferguson, nothing has changed. There was still blatant discrimination, blatant segregation, and the rights of the minority weren't being addressed as they needed it to be addressed, because it was being sugarcoated and it was being addressed via the majority, right? Because when you have somebody speaking on your behalf, it's not the same as you saying, no, this is what I need. If I said Amin doesn't need water because he can drink juice, right? Is not the same as Amin saying, no, I need water because it is a basic human right, right? I mean, and like examples like these are like what essentially goes to show why we need public action, why we need people to speak on their behalf rather than having people to speak for them. And Thurgood Marshall, he is Supreme Court Justice. He was one of the first African American Supreme Court Justice, and the NAACP was the National Advancement of Colored People. And these organizations gave them a platform, gave Black Americans a platform to speak and let them say that, these are areas where things are, our rights are being lacked, our rights are lacking, and, we're not treated the same way as white Americans. And why do you guys think it's important for us to, facilitate for platforms? Like, without platforms, do you think it'd be possible for us to be vocal about our opinions?
What do you mean by platforms?
Huh?
Can you repeat like what you mean?
Do you guys think
platforms?
do you guys think we need platforms for us to be able to vocalize our opinions? A platform is saying that somebody to give you a platform to speak, or like an area where you're allowed to, address what you need to address. Well, first of all, let's talk about platform. What do you guys think a platform is?
A platform is a place where everyone can speak freely and equally.
In hindsight, yes, a platform is where, like, a place where you, like, it gives you a moment. It gives you, your own spotlight, okay? And so, you can use this as a medium to get your point across. It's a medium. That's essentially what it is. And the NAACP was a medium for African Americans, because it was a right of Black Americans, and it gave them minority rights in the sense that they allowed for an area, for a platform and a medium where for Black Americans, for them to say, you know what, this isn't being we aren't being treated fairly in civil rights, and there's still segregation going on. And they spoke on behalf of the NAACP through Thurgood Marshall. So Thurgood Marshall was a Supreme Court justice. He worked for the government. He worked for the United States government as a justice that upheld the Constitution, who upheld the rights, the basic human rights that were granted to any American citizen, regardless of color, regardless of race or religion. And he was a member of the NAACP. And with this, we found that when we had this connection between somebody who worked for the government, and then we had a platform where minorities can speak, and then we had the minorities who spoke their piece and who vocalized and advocated for themselves, it's a structure, it's a chain. This is what we need for us to be able to, address situations that are important to us and not have people speak on our behalf. So that covers that. Geez. So next we're going to talk about David and Goliath. Okay, it's a speech by Jesse Jackson when he was running for office in the 1980s when he was running for presidential candidate. Um, let's go first before we watch the video. I want to talk about changes again. What are some changes that you guys would like to see in the community like today? Like social changes that you guys think are important today? Anybody can talk, guys. Is he gone?
Who are you?
Mohammed, do you want to say anything about this? Well, what are some changes you'd like to see?
In today,
Yeah, today, like socially, what are some things you think are important?
I think better economic reform. Nice.
Or what about anything else? Anybody? Let's just summarize. Let's just get the ball rolling. We can get some like I don't know personal opinions on it, like changes that you guys think is important. So he said, Mohammed said, economic reform. Anything else you think is important?
Well, being from India, I mean, I feel very strongly about the whole thing in India right now. So that's definitely a change I'd like to see.
Yeah, again, marginalization of minorities. And do you want to explain what's going on?
Sure. So basically, we have this President Modi. He's a lot of problems. Trump endorsed him and everything. Basically, he's over here making really terrible laws, things that shouldn't be happening to happen, such as lynching of Muslims by majority Hindus for ungrounded reasons. So basically, it's just a whole lot of stuff going on over there, and it's mainly because of this president move and trying our best to. A lot of people here in the U.S. are really trying to either get rid of him or make some change that would be for the better.
Okay, so you kind of explain. So these are some laws that affected his community in India. You know, what Amin was talking about was when it comes to the rights and the laws that the government of India passed on against the minority the Muslims, the minority in the country of India. It disenfranchised them a lot. It didn't grant them the right for citizenship. It didn't grant them the right for basic human rights. It didn't allow them to speak publicly, and a lot of there was a lot of violent civil unrest, and it led to Muslims being killed, human rights violations, and a lot of things that we did see in the past in the United States when in the post-slavery era during the Jim Crow era, because we have one group of people who say we are better than we are the majority, we are better than the minority, and our rights and our needs outweigh theirs, and so they felt as if that was a free ticket for them to be able to do what they were doing. And so again, it's necessary for minorities and disenfranchised communities to engage in public policy and advocacy for change. So in Amin's case, in what he was talking about in India, there were multiple protests, there were multiple politicians and activists talking about minority rights and how they were disenfranchised, and they engaged in public policy, they engaged in the political system of India, and they tried to push for it via talking about the Constitution. It said we are a secular nation. It's unlawful for you to put one group of people over another, and it's still going on to this day. They never really did reach. It's still going on to this day. The argument was that it contradicts their constitution. It contradicts the concept of secularism in that you can't have a state religion and you can't say this state religion is superior to another one, right? And again, and because of that, they found multiple avenues of public policy, and multiple minorities were able to advocate, and they continue to advocate to this day. They continue to try to influence public policy to this day, to try to engage and to try to overturn these unconstitutional laws for the state or for the government of India. And that's a good example, I mean. But now, yeah, we're going to listen to Jesse Jackson's speech, and he's talking about minorities. He's talking about why minorities need to speak up, why they need to start advocating, because and you'll see. Let's watch the video first, and we'll get an understanding.
Jesse Jackson running.
Dang, man.
Jesse Jackson, running for the Democratic nomination in 1984, addresses a crowd at Henley Baptist Church in Philadelphia.
8 Democrats running for the nomination. This time around, you got a chance and you got a choice. You want somebody who marched for you to get the right to vote, but you got a choice. You want somebody who challenged corporate America to hire and give you contracts. You got a choice. It's choice time. All this talk about qualification. What the blacks know about foreign policy. It's an insult. I was 3 years old. I came into my consciousness. My daddy was coming home from the war. Foreign policy. If he was so dumb, how'd you get over there and get back? If you didn't know foreign policy, why'd they give him a gun? And when they gave it to him, he knew which way to shoot. We know foreign policy. When you buy Honda and Toyota, that's foreign policy. Russian vodka, that's foreign policy. Panasonic and Sony, that's foreign policy. Mercedes-Benz, that's foreign policy. As a matter of fact, we came in on a foreign policy. Yeah! I know y'all in a hurry. I'm gonna leave it now. It's time for a new course, a new coalition, a new leadership. Somebody got to rise above race, rise above sex, a new leadership, a choice, a chance. Don't cry about what you don't have. Use what you got. Reagan won the last time, not by genius. Reagan won when we were asleep. He won by the margin of despair. He won by the margin of the fracture of our coalition. He won by the margin of racial division. He won by default. I close with another story. There's a little shepherd boy named David. Everybody in town was scared of Goliath. Philadelphia, your time has come. Don't stop at the mayor's office. Go on higher. Because you must never forget that about the time we began to take over cities, Nixon shifted the power to the suburbs. And now Reagan shifted it to states. So you got mayors with more and more responsibility and less power. We got more and more folk and fewer services. We cannot stop. We got to rise on higher. Little David. Little David. Little David. Took off his unnecessary garments. Little David. Didn't want to get weighted down with a lot of foolishness. Little David. Took what God gave him, a slingshot, and God risked a today is, David, we need to go organize Pennsylvania and win because we're going to stop the rocks. It's been laying around and pick them up. In 1980, Reagan won Massachusetts by 2,500 votes. There were over 100,000 students unregistered, over 50,000 blacks, over 50,000 Hispanics. He won by 2,500. Ted carried the state. Rocks just laying around. He won Illinois by 300,000 votes. 800,000 unregistered blacks, 500,000 Hispanics. Rocks just laying around. He won 1980. 3 million high school students unregistered to vote. Now they've been registered to draft. Rocks, they're laying around. 11 million college students who could have chosen jobs over jail, peace over wall, that didn't vote. Now they're crying. Rocks, they're laying around. One states by 182,000 votes. Well, there were 3 million unregistered blacks in them same 8 states. Just laying around. He won New York by 165,000. 900,000 blacks, 600,000 Hispanic. Rocks just laying around. 1980, Reagan won Pennsylvania by 300,000 votes. 400,000 students unregistered. More than 600,000 blacks unregistered. Reagan won Pennsylvania by the margin of despair, by the margin, the fracture of our coalition. Your time has come. Pick up your slingshot. Pick up your rock. Declare our time has come. A new day has begun. Red, yellow, black, and white. We're all precious in God's sight. Our time has come.
Okay, yeah. So, yes, that was Jesse Jackson's David Glad speech when he ran for president in the 80s. So does anybody what are your takes on the speech? What are some things we could advocate for and call for change? And what are some things that you noticed that he talked about and just things that just stood out to you? Anybody can talk.
He was talking a lot about the racial gap.
Yeah, he was talking about the racial gap. He was talking about the age gap and how they didn't have a medium for advocacy. They didn't have a collective unit. From what we talked about in the beginning, from what we talked about, in towards the end, what we mentioned, what we need is a collective. What we need is a medium, a platform for us to speak, a platform for us to be vocal. These are all things that Jesse Jackson believed that minorities lacked at the time, and because of that, the outcome, the presidency and what came out of that was that, they elected a president that didn't, value, Ronald Reagan didn't value the needs of minorities the same way he did the majority, and that his treatment of inner cities, his presidency, his minorities, and that's what he was about when he said, time elect as a unit, try to call for change, try to stand up together and advocate for ourselves instead of letting another person advocate for you. Can you guys hear me correctly, by the way? I felt it was like I got cut off.
Yeah, it's cutting out a little bit every now and then.
Okay, well, I'll try to, but you mentioned the need for public advocacy and a collective unit. So we need to all work together, is what he's saying, to call for changes for minorities, because no one else is going to do it the same way we need it to be done, right? No one can speak on our behalf the same way we can speak for ourselves, because, you know, as a minority, we represent the needs and the rights that aren't given to us. We represent what was taken from us, essentially. And again, that's a good take on it. And if you guys want to research a little bit more as to this, you will listen to his speech. He speaks a lot about minority rights and about people of color and why they were marginalized in, you know, the 1900s and well into, you know, the 21st century. After that, you know, we're going to quickly go over this chart real quick. Okay, this is this is how bills and laws or bills are turned into laws. Okay, now somebody give me okay, we'll use a means example. Actually, no, we can't use a means example. It's a different country. We'll use Muhammad example, economic reform. Okay, if Muhammad representative of a state, he's in this corner right here, representative. Okay, and he said, you know, or sorry, he's the public. He's an individual voicing his opinion for economic reform, and the person who represents him in the U.S. Political system is his representative, the person he elected to office to speak on his behalf. Okay, this is essentially a diagram of a republic. And now, when Muhammad says we need economic reform because, you know, there's a lot of people who live impoverished and they don't get the same rights as the majority and as the 1%. And he voices opinion, his representatives, and he has a collective unit saying, you know, we all believe the same way. His representative will say, my constituents feel this way, I'm going to draft a bill about it, okay? Once he drafts his bill, he's going to introduce it into legislation. He's going to talk about it in the House of Representatives. Now, we'll talk more about legislature tomorrow in tomorrow's lesson and the branches of government. But as for now, the legislature is composed of two houses, the House of Representatives and the Senate. So when the representative, who is a representative in the House of Reps, he drafts his bill, he takes it into committee, okay? And they forge his bill, and he bases off of everything that, you know, his constituents, the people, the minorities, and everybody who's voiced their opinion on this bill, what they had to say, and they mark it up, and they make sure everybody's point of view and everybody's perspective is reflective in that bill. Once that's done, he's going to take it to the floor, the House of Representatives, and they're going to debate on it, okay? Now, this gives everybody a chance to say a piece on whether it's a majority or whether it's a minority. When they say, okay, I don't think this is needed, they have a chance to, you know, say their piece about that. Whereas, you know, as somebody who says, I think this is a bill that we need, they have their chance to say their piece on that as well. Once this is done, they vote on it. House of Representatives, they vote on this bill to see whether it's something they want to pass, whether they say, okay, you know, this economic reform bill to, you know, to offer a stipend for all people making less than a specific income, this doesn't pass. Let's say it doesn't pass. If it doesn't pass, it goes back into the committee works, okay? Once it goes back into the committee works, they have to review it again. They have to make adjustments. They could either make adjustments and bring it back to debate, or they make adjustments, or they, you know, it sits here and it continues to be in work until a point where, you know, they just kind of, the bill essentially dies off because it hasn't been updated, it hasn't been, you know, fixed up. And so let's just say they fixed it up and they brought it back to debate. And this time the House of the representatives, they debate on it, they amend it, and it passes. Once it passes, it goes to the Congressional Budget Office, right? And this is to make sure that the bill is fiscally stable to be able to work on a national level, okay? If it's an economic reform bill, it has to obviously, you know, reflect the needs and reflect what the government can offer to the people, right? What's this? Yeah, someone just said something in the chat. Thanks. I mean, and then once it goes into budget, they focus on this, and then you know, they see whether the bill is fiscally possible, and then it moves on to the Senate. And once it's in the Senate, the process repeats. What happened in the House of Representatives repeats in the Senate. The committee works on the bill, they edit it, it goes into debate. If the Senate disagrees, it goes back, and if it can either die here or it can be amended and goes back. Once they're done with that, it's enrolled and it goes to the president for final approval. And again, this process is repeated. Once the president gets it, he can review it, he can veto it, send it back to the Senate, where they have to send it back to the committee, review it, and make any adjustments and send it back. Or what they can do is they can vote again, and they can overturn the president's veto and say, you know what, the Senate voted again, the majority says it's possible, and the legislature says this is allowed, and they can pass the bill. This is one of the rights that the checks and balance system that the U.S. government has, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow. All right, so and what we have right here this is the Maryland state government. This is just their government page, and this is the Virginia government page. And what this has is that these are basic information that you guys, as citizens, anybody can access this. This is a public right, and it gives you options to contact your representatives, your elected officials. It gives you their contacts. It contacts legal aspects, the laws, and everything. It has all these for you to make sure that you know your rights, and that you know how to function, and how to operate, and how to convey your needs in the political system, in the Virginia state government, or in the Maryland state government. These are all important for you guys to have this resource. And once you have this resource, it's easy for you guys to know that I have to easily contact my elected officials if something if something bothers me. You have every right to contact your House of your representative, your local representatives, and say, this is happening. I don't feel as if it's fair, and you have your right to be vocal and advocate for yourself. And that if you guys do it collectively, it makes a greater difference. If we collectively call the representatives and said, you know what, this isn't fair, we need legislature on this, and he, as an elected official, has every right to voice your opinion and to help you guys in whatever way necessary. And again, this is just something for you guys to review. We'll go more in depth about this in tomorrow's lesson, but aside from that, we're going to summarize. And here's an example bill from a lawful absence of school for mental illness. And this is what a bill looks like and how it was sent to the House for review. And again, this is something we're going to touch more on tomorrow, but just a quick overview so you guys get an idea of what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I think I'm going to switch it over to Alawi now. I think Alawi had something to say. Alawi, do you want to say something about, Ilya and the work we're going to do tomorrow?
I think that's actually yeah, can I actually go to the beginning of the slide?
So while we're doing that, big round of applause for Brother Sabr. Jazakallah khair, very exciting information, and I learned quite a bit about civil rights and from the 2 videos that you showed us. And just to reemphasize the fact here, this is a program that's done by youth. So both Alawi and Sabr are in college, and they're members of our internship program. They're very passionate about what they're doing. And as Alawi mentioned earlier, we not only train youth, but the organization itself is run by youth. So this is an example to show everyone how you can actually make a difference. And Alawi has been very active over the past 12 months, taking young people down to Congress, meeting with representatives from Congress and senators to advocate for change, and quite a bit is going on. So inshallah, what we hope that you all can do as you complete these sessions is that you apply these concepts in real life. And there's many things that you can get involved in, whether it's personal needs, as young people who live in your respective jurisdictions, whether it's traffic law or things at school or juvenile law or whatever it is. There's an opportunity, like Sabr was saying earlier, where you can make a change on your behalf, so no one else is making those changes for you. So we'll take a quick look here at a video. I think Alawi wants to show us something, and then we'll wrap up from there.
This video, right?
Yeah, that video. Just to give a description of what Ilya is.
Ilya's mission is transforming leaders and advancing.
Did we lose audio?
Sorry guys, I think I just got kicked, or I don't know. I think my screen just froze. Alawi and Sidi Nasser, should we play the video again, or are we just gonna discuss it? There's a poll you guys have to take. Okay, so we're gonna take a quick poll real quick. Where's the poll?
It's on the screen. They're taking it right now.
The participants should be able to see the poll.
Okay. Alawi, do you want to share the poll? Because I can't share it.
So the poll is already up. It was up automatically, but you could also press poll on the bottom next to manage participants if you can't see the poll right now.
Let me check here from my side. I think maybe I can share that.
It's showing on my screen if you'd like me.
Oh, you are seeing it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right, it looks like the first question, how engaging did you find this session? 75% are saying very engaging, 25% somewhat. The second question, how much did you learn about new concepts today? 25% are saying tons and 75% are saying quite a bit. So Jazakumullah khairan for that feedback, and I'll turn it back to Sabra. I think he might have some assignments for us to do tonight by the time we get to meet each other tomorrow.
Thank you. So I was thinking, since we reviewed over topics of public advocacy and just vocalizing issues that you guys think is important, I was gonna assign you guys something brief to bring to class tomorrow. I was thinking perhaps if we could find issues that we could discuss, like current events. If we could find events from, let's say, 2019 to 2020 of things that happen socially, that things in current events and things that happen around the world that you think is important for us to be vocal about and to talk about as as a community, and particularly things that you think affect minorities more. Okay, so if you think that's something we can talk about, if everybody could just bring up a topic, okay, just something you research vaguely, write like maybe 5-6 sentences on it and just bring it to class tomorrow, and we can talk about it, and inshallah we can find we can implement it into the lesson tomorrow, and we'll find a way to see what you guys have to say and kind of pick your brains. But other than that, thank you for having me. The class was wonderful, and inshallah you guys learned a lot. And then if you have any questions.
All right, Jazakumullah khair again. Thank you everyone for attending today. We'll see you tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern, and thank you Sabra and Alawi for the work you've been doing. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum.